Hello, universe. Today I wanted to talk about burnout. So there's two stages of burnout. There's short-term and long-term burnout. And today I wanted to give you some tips about how to avoid these two different stages, or a better way to phrase it would be how to handle burnout. Because if you are pushing yourself to your limit, then you're going to eventually encounter burnout, and it's somewhat inevitable. So, I created some advice here. My general advice is first, you need to be studying for the right reasons. You need to love and enjoy what you study. If you are not passionate about the subject that you are studying, perhaps you just don't understand it well enough, because most subjects are pretty interesting if you really take the time to try and understand them. However, if you find that you really just hate your major or the subject or the class that you're taking, and you can't kind of philosophically get yourself out of that, then of course you need to look towards longer term changing the topics and the courses that you take to make sure that the courses that you're taking are actually aligned with your interests. The second piece of advice is to know your limits, and the way to know your limits is by pushing yourself to them, okay? So you need to work really hard and consistently. And if you work really hard and you start to encounter burnout, that can actually be an opportunity for you to understand your limitations and the issues and problems in how you study, so that you can then make adjustments and improve your learning style. One of the most beneficial semesters to me in terms of life experience was the semester that I got the most burned out in. And that's just because I learned so much about about what to prioritize when you're studying, and the problems that I had with my approach to learning. Now that brings me to my next point, which is quality over quantity. This was the key insight that I referenced earlier. Quality over quantity in your learning process essentially means that instead of studying a wide array of topics at once, really focus in on one or two topics and try to really understand them well. And this will benefit you in terms of your long-term growth and in terms of your burnout, obviously, because you have fewer things to focus on. But it'll also help you long-term achieve more of your goals, because your retention is going to be much higher. So the subjects that you do learn in high quality, you are going to understand them at a much higher level, and whereas somebody who just goes through and takes a wide array of classes, which is what I did at first, they're not actually going to retain as much information on every specific subject, so it's actually hurting them in the long run. Now, next question is, are you studying the right way? So you need to, instead of just jumping into the homeworks and trying to attack the homeworks, you might waste a lot of time because you don't understand what you're doing. So before you start doing exercises, make sure that you have read the textbook and reviewed the lecture notes. And most importantly, make sure that you understand the relevant concepts, whether it be you encounter some concept on your homework and that requires you to do a Google search on Google for 30 minutes to understand what that concept is. That's going to be worth your time in the long run, because if you don't understand the concept, then you're almost just attacking the exercise without the right tools. So of course you're going to spend way too much time, and that can lead you towards getting burned out. Now, I see a lot of students that I tutor who, they have a question, they raise a flag, they have a question about their homework, but they haven't taken the time to look up the topic or understand the topic. So why are you even attempting the homework? Why are you even attempting the homework if you don't know, for example, what row echelon form is? You're trying to find the row echelon form of a matrix, but you don't even know what that means. So how are you even going to attack the homework? There's some prerequisites. You have to take a little bit of time before you start the homework to review the topics, which are important, which will save you a lot of time in the long run in terms of being able to do your homeworks efficiently and actually retain the material and do well on the test, okay? Now, the next point is adaptive learning. So here we want to change the way you study to better suit your needs. All right? This is a great and important aspect of the learning process, which it took me a long time to figure out. And that is, every few weeks or so, you should have a weekly schedule, kind of an outline of how you're going to study. Now, it should be very flexible. Think about the difference between writing an outline versus an essay. When you write an outline, you're just kind of getting the main ideas in there and getting some sort of structure, whereas in an essay, you're basically formulating that structure sentence by sentence, okay? So you should never write the essay before making the outline, okay? And when you make the outline, it needs to be flexible enough to work day in and day out. So, for example, my schedule, I have 4 hours Monday, Tuesday devoted to reading, 4 hours of exercises on Wednesday related to those readings, and then 4 hours of research on Friday, Saturday. And I have rest days on Thursday and Sunday. And then outside of those hours that I've allocated, I have a lot of flexibility. I can do YouTube, I can study whatever topic I want. I could, go exercise or go on a hike or hang out with friends. There's a lot of flexibility apart from those rigid specified hours. And so that's more of like an outline rather than a very specific structured, okay, at 3 p.m. I'm going to study algebra for 2 hours, and then at 6:30 p.m. I'm going to study manifolds for 1 hour. That's not an effective way to structure your studying, because ultimately your brain needs some creative freedom in order to do things like homeworks for a specific topic. And for example, if you have a homework in a class, you don't know if that homework is going to take you 4 hours or 10 hours, right? So there's no point in saying, okay, I'm going to do that homework for this set amount of hours. Like, yeah, that might be good, but you need to recognize that that you need some flexibility. Okay, you need some flexibility in your schedule to account for, oh wait, crap, this homework is actually going to take me way longer than I expected. Hopefully, my schedule has some flexibility to accommodate those additional hours. Okay. And then again, not only that, but the schedule that you create and that outline that you create needs to itself be adaptive. So every few weeks you need to come back and say, okay, have I achieved these weekly goals? And if not, what are the problems? And how do I adjust this schedule to better suit my learning needs? Okay. All right. So now let's talk about burnout specifically. So the step one of avoiding burnout is identifying burnout, okay? So you want to identify red flags of burnout before they become too severe. I want to bring up the analogy of lifting at the gym, okay? So if you're lifting at the gym, and let's say you're doing the shoulder press and you have really bad form, okay? Then if you do the shoulder press and consistently have bad form, and let's say you feel a slight tweak in your shoulder, but you kind of ignore it and you ignore some red flags, then maybe a few weeks later, you're going to wake up and be extremely injured, or you're going to do too much weight and just one rep goes wrong and you're going to get really bad injury, and then you're going to be out and you're going to be unable to make progress because you have to take time to heal from your injury, and you're going to be out for a long period of time. So that's the analogy for long-term burnout, where essentially your mind becomes injured. You gain a literal injury of the mind where you can no longer study, and you're so burned out you can't make progress, you can't think about the topics clearly, and your mind is literally injured, and you also lose all motivation to do any work. So this is a severe injury, and it's something that you want to avoid, and you want to take steps to avoid this long before it happens, okay? So, number one is looking for red flags. So identifying red flags of burnout. This might be that you feel lack of motivation, you feel anger, you feel angry or frustrated or stressed about your studies, okay? So you notice that your mind, you're thinking, and you feel stress about an upcoming assignment or test or some other stressor in your life, okay? Or maybe the red flag could be you look at how you analyze your weekly schedule and you're like, oh wait, I'm doing way too much work. Like I'm studying 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, with no breaks. That's obviously extreme. But then it's like, well, that might be a red flag. Maybe you can handle that, but long term, that's a red flag, because that could be a sign of burnout. Okay, so not necessarily, but it could be a red flag. So once you identify red flags, you need to look at these stressors in your life and figure out, are they short term or are they long term? Okay. Short-term stressors are things which are looming ahead in the near future. So for example, I have a test next week, or I have a big homework assignment due next Thursday. These are short-term stresses and causes of short-term burnout. Now, there are long-term stressors as well. So perhaps I'm looking forward and I'm a sophomore in college and I have so much work left ahead of me, but I already feel kind of burned out. Or, so I'm looking ahead 2 years or 3 years at all the courses I'm going to have to take. Or let's say, I'm just starting my PhD, or let's say I'm 2 years into my PhD and I have 4 years left, and just the ocean of work feels overwhelming in the long term. So these are the two distinct types of burnout that I wanted to address and separate. We have short term, we have long term. Let's talk about strategies for dealing with the short term burnout first. So for short term burnout, it's a little bit less. It's a little bit more treatable. Okay, so there are short term fixes or short term tricks that you can kind of implement that might help you. Okay, so here are some tricks that I came up with. So number one, listen to motivational music. If there's music that you find motivating, as long as it's not too distracting, that can sometimes really help trick your brain into feeling more motivated. Okay. Second piece of advice is just to grit your teeth and get the work done. At least get started, right? So you have to, it's like a marathon runner at the end of the marathon. If you only have a mile left in the marathon, then you basically have to find that second wind and just force yourself to get through the last mile, right? And a lot of people psychologically, if you think about how close you are to finishing this task and how it really is just a short-term stress, and once that short-term time frame is over with, you'll be done and you'll be able to not have this stress in your life, that'll give you some more motivation to just get started and just run that last mile, okay? So this goes into my next point, which is do not procrastinate, okay? For short-term stress, you really have to fight short-term burnout with work, okay? With work ethic. And that's going to mean not procrastinating, because a lot of short-term stress is due to mental stress, mental buildup, the psychological stress of these events looming over your head. Like this big homework assignment that I haven't started is due in 3 days. And that's like causing you a lot of mental stress. And that's causing you to kind of freeze up and not be able to motivate yourself in your studies. Well, that's not due to the fact that you can't study. It's not due to the fact that your mind is injured and you can't study. It's just a psychological barrier that is basically causing you to feel burned out. But it's an illusion. It's just a psychological stress of feeling the burden of upcoming work. You need to ignore that psychological stress and just get started. Don't worry about how much work you have left to do. If you know that the deadline is short term, this is a short term workload, then you just need to get started. Okay? You need to get started. Now, there are a couple tips that I have, which you can also handle if you're feeling too burned out to even get started. Which is, one, you can take a break for food or coffee. Okay, so go grab a coffee, go grab some food, take a study break. Second, you could take a weekend off if possible. So depending on how short term the deadlines are, you might be able to just take a weekend off, go take some time, do something you enjoy, or just relax. Watch movies, do nothing, read a book, just do absolutely nothing for maybe 1 or 2 days. And if possible, that'll help reset your mind to kind of approach the task ahead of you with more rigor. And I also recommend that strategy right before a big test. So I do not recommend necessarily studying the night before a test. I would say study really intensely the week before a test, but then take the very day before the test, you want to take it light. Don't study much the day before the test. Study a ton the week before the test. And then let your mind rest and recover the day before the test so that your mind can be at peak performance when you have to take a test, okay? All right, now another piece of advice is just take a nap. So oftentimes if you take a nap, then you wake up and you feel more rejuvenated. Your mind is rested and recovered. You could take a shower. That'll also help you feel like relieve some mental stress. You could go for a workout. You could go to the gym for an hour. That will also help relieve short-term mental stress. You can also change your study location. This is a great piece of advice. So maybe if you feel if you feel the short-term burnout, you could try to go to a different coffee shop than you're used to going to, or to a different library, or maybe a different section of the library where you don't normally study. And this will help kind of give your mind a feeling of being less stuck. So a lot of times procrastination and burnout, you feel kind of stuck and you feel like you can't keep studying, right? And so changing the study location helps you feel less stuck because you're physically not stuck in a single location. So if you go to a new study location, you'll feel this new kind of urgency to study and the things will feel different. And that's really helped me, okay? And so changing your study location is actually going to bring me into my long-term burnout advice, tips, and tricks, okay? So for long-term burnout, this is a way more severe and dangerous issue, and this is something that you really need to prepare against by implementing some strategies. Now, I want to emphasize that changing your study location is actually one of my long-term pieces of advice as well. So don't just study only in the same location, switch it up a little bit, okay? Now, for long-term burnout, we need to prioritize organization. So you need to understand your weekly course expectations. You need to understand whether it's a course expectation or just a weekly study goals. You need to very clearly understand your weekly expectations to achieving a long-term goal. You need to be organized about these weekly expectations, okay? So for every course, for example, every course that you're taking, you should know exactly what is due, the next homework that is due, the next thing that you have to turn in for that class, and when it's due. You should always know that, right? And if you don't know that, then you really need to work on your organization. So there are different ways that different people get organized. One thing that's helped me is creating a schedule, but also just going to Canvas and just being always aware of what's due next and when. And so when I've gotten more into my independent study outside of coursework, then it's become more important for me to actually structure and build a weekly schedule, because I no longer am given a weekly schedule like you are in a course. And actually, if you're studying independently, then you can create your own course and create your own syllabus and weekly schedule as one might construct if they were a professor teaching a course, right? You can just construct that for yourself of, here are my weekly topics I'm going to cover. These are the sections of the textbook and these are the homeworks, right? So this is organization is the first piece of advice. The second is to avoid procrastination, okay? So to avoid long-term burnout, you're going to want to avoid procrastinating work consistently, because if you consistently procrastinate, then eventually what's going to happen is when you get more and more advanced in your study, those deadlines are going to start accumulating on you, and then you're going to have a bunch of different things due in very short time intervals. And then what's going to happen is, and I know because I've done this before, is basically you're going to have to become an expert procrastinator and basically pour in hours, massive study blocks, right before all these deadlines to get all this work done. You put in these massive study blocks for like a few days or maybe even a week to get all this work done. And then all of a sudden you're so burned out that you can't even begin to try and study for the next deadline and the next thing that's due, right? So you're kind of you pass this giant wave of work, and then after you barely survive it, if you even survive it, then you're so burned out you can't even you're going to have to take twice as long to recover. So then you're going to have to take some recovery time, but then all of a sudden the deadlines, once you've recovered, the deadlines have crept up again, right? And so it's just this continual wave of mental strain and mental agony that you're going to be putting yourself through if you procrastinate. It is not helping you with your stress, okay? Procrastinating is different than taking a rest day. Taking a rest day is great. You should take rest days and prioritize rest. However, procrastination, for procrastination's sake, is dangerous. It is like having bad form when you're lifting weights, and it is giving you a higher likelihood of mental injury, okay? Now, the next point that I'll go for is physical exercise, okay? Incorporate physical exercise into your routine. I prefer to do an hour at the gym approximately 4 to 5 days a week. But whatever that looks like for you, humans need physical exercise to relieve stress, okay? And without physical exercise, mental stress has no way to release itself. So physical exercise is essential for long-term and maybe even short-term burnout because it allows you to relieve, it creates a mechanism for relieving stress, okay? Now, the next thing along those lines is social time. So take time to be social. Of course, you don't want to take too much time because you don't want to just be the popular kid and have to spend all your time entertaining and being friends with a bunch of people, because you're not going to have time for that if you really want to make progress. You need to have, in my opinion, it's ideal to have a relatively small group of friends, small to medium-sized group of friends that you're close with and that you spend a good amount of time with, but not too much time, right? You need time for your own individual study. Maybe you get through social time through studying with friends, right? That can be a great way to balance study time and spending time with friends. But also just having some time, maybe going out with your friends out on the town, or going skiing with your friends, or playing cards, or whatever it may be. You need to have some time allocated weekly to spending time with your friends. And this is, again, key for mental stress relief, okay? Talking and having conversations with people. Maybe you complain to them about your burnout. You complain to them about your schedule and how much work you're doing. And that actually helps relieve mental stress, is if you can kind of cope with someone, or you can kind of converse with someone about these things. So don't become a hermit. And just because you want to study all the time, it's actually not going to be effective for you. You need to create social time in order to avoid long-term burnout. Now, next piece of advice is to prioritize scheduled rest. Okay, so schedule rest. Schedule a day in your schedule, maybe that's a rest day. Okay, and try not to let your work bleed into that. Maybe you underestimate the length of a homework, and then you have to use your rest day to maybe finish up that homework. That's okay, but just try to not let that happen. Try to really get everything done before your rest day, and then take that rest day and really prioritize resting, okay? Because your brain needs that. It's just like working out at the gym. If you want to make progress at the gym, if you want to build muscles, you need rest and recovery time. That is critical for the brain to grow and to form those neural connections. It needs time to rest. So schedule a rest day, and don't schedule too many hours in your schedule. I mean, I think that for me, I have 4 hours of intensive study allocated 5 days a week. And then, on top of that, there's other work that needs to be done that's low intensity work. So for high intensity work, I'm not going to be doing high intensity work more than 4 hours a day, because my brain simply cannot handle it. It's too much. After the 4 hour mark, my brain just starts to lose its ability to do the higher level math. I can still do low intensity work, but I think that that this is part of rest, is understanding your high intensity, low intensity training, and then making sure that you don't do too much high intensity at once, and spacing out the high intensity, so that, like, say that I'm doing high intensity reading 2 days a week, then, I'm not going to do high intensity reading 5 days a week, right? It's like I'm not going to do a leg day 5 days a week. I need to do a leg day 1 day a week or 2 days a week at the gym, but I don't need to do leg day every day of the week. That's why I split up the different muscle groups. I do chest, then I do, back, then arms, shoulders, and then 2 leg days. And they're kind of intermixed with each other so that each muscle group has time to relax when I'm focusing on the other muscle groups, okay? So you need a little bit of diversity in your learning, and incorporate rest, not only scheduled rest, but also rest that comes from kind of diversifying the way that you study to allow different parts of your brain to heal, very much like a workout routine. Now, the next tip that I'll give is prioritize learning over grades, okay? Reading textbooks and lecture notes before attempting the exercises. The goal should not be, I am going to get every question correct on this homework. The goal is, how do I get those questions correct? Do I understand how to get the question correct? that might seem like the same thing, but there's a big difference, right? I tutor a lot of students who, start the homeworks without ever looking at the textbook, without ever, if they encounter a concept in the homework that they don't understand, they just ask a tutor, right? But they could just be Googling that. If there's a concept in your homework that you don't understand, do a Google search, read about it for 30 minutes. Try to figure out what it is, what the concept is, right? And so there's probably a weekly syllabus that involves some reading for your classes. Make sure you do the readings. That's it. And then once you do the readings, do them before you do the homeworks so that you spend all that time understanding the reading, and then you can do the homework more efficiently. If you don't do the reading and understand the topic before you attempt the homework or before you attempt exercises, then you're going to be very inefficient at doing those exercises because you don't really know what you're doing, right? So, and at a high level, at a graduate level, it becomes impossible. It literally becomes impossible to do the homework before doing the reading. So you have to basically prioritize the learning over the grade. That means prioritizing understanding over just getting the right answer, okay? All right, now the next piece of advice is diet, okay? This is an interesting one. So structuring your diet, every person has a diet that's going to work better for them. So this is another one of those which you need to adapt and adjust to suit your needs. However, what works best for me is I have a balance of protein, carbs, and vegetables. And so I try to cook my own meals. I go to the grocery store. I try to cook my own meals. I try to buy meat that's USDA organic due to ethical the ethical considerations of animal welfare. And then, but I found that I cannot be vegan. I cannot be vegetarian. I need to eat meat in order for my brain to function correctly. Okay. And then also, I need a good amount of carbohydrates, so like pasta, rice, etc. Those are really important fuel for the brain, and also fats. So having some amount of fat in your diet as well. And this is something that I think I personally can improve upon is really structuring a good diet, making sure you're getting the right nutrients that you need for your brain to heal. If you're just working out at the gym, it's pretty easy. You just need to intake a ton of protein. Drink a lot of milk, a lot of protein shakes, and eat a lot of protein fueled foods. But for learning material in the brain, it's more complicated, right? The brain needs these like fats, fatty acids, and it also needs carbohydrates alongside protein. So the brain is much more complicated in terms of the nutrients that it needs. And so you're going to need to kind of do a little bit of research and optimize your diet, okay? Now, here's a piece of advice that you will not find from a doctor or from a dietitian, which is do not eat much food before your first study session, okay? So for me, when I wake up, I do not eat breakfast. I grab a coffee, okay? And the most I'll have is a very, very small breakfast, but usually I don't have any breakfast, okay? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to study, okay? So I start my first study session of the day. And that study session is at least 2 hours, but usually like 4 hours. And the thing here is that in math, you need maximum mental capacity. Like you're using your mind to its maximum capacity. When you eat food, actually all the blood in your body is going to rush into your stomach, and which is away from your mind. And so your mind isn't going to get enough blood. It's called the blood-brain connection. Your mind isn't going to have enough blood to function at its highest performance, okay? So for maximum mental performance, do not eat much food in the mornings, okay? And this is just what's worked best for me. And I notice like a big difference. When I have a large meal, I feel like I am slightly less productive, okay? And if it's in the evening or if it's after I've studied and I have a meal, I feel almost exhausted because I feel like all the energy from my body has gone from my brain into digesting the food, okay? Now, of course, this is not, I'm not a physician, I'm not a dietitian. This is just kind of a tip or a trick that I found works best for my math studying and my ability to learn math and study effectively. So it's definitely not like the healthiest thing that you can do, but it works quite well. Now, another piece of advice is push yourself to your limits. Okay, this is the last piece of advice for long term. Push yourself to your limits so you understand your limits. I think we went over that before, hopefully. But yeah, you want to push yourself to your limits so that you know your limits and you stay kind of within them, but continually push the boundaries of your limits. This goes without saying, is that you need to consistently work hard, okay? You need to consistently work hard, and eventually, if you work hard consistently, you're not a procrastinator, you do the work day in and day out, okay? Then you will get addicted to mental exercise. So you will actually love studying. You will love learning. It's like going to the gym. If you go to the gym or running or any sort of physical exercise, if you go to the gym, let's say you're first going to the gym and you're starting out, you're going to hate it. You're just going to hate it. It's just same for everyone. Or if you're just running, you're just starting to learn how to run, you're going to hate running, right? And when you're just starting, you're not going to be able to push yourself to the same limit that you would if you are much more experienced. Okay, so when you're at the gym, you don't want to push yourself too much at the very beginning because you're going to get injured. And in fact, all the way throughout your process of going to the gym, as you build more and more muscle, you still need to be careful that you don't get injured throughout the entire process. Okay, so pushing yourself to your limits is important, but don't push yourself too far beyond them, right? And those limits are going to change the more you study, right? The more that you study math, the easier it will be for you to assimilate new information. Okay, so textbooks that I found unreadable, or topics that if I sat down and tried to read a textbook, just couldn't understand it at all 4 years ago or maybe 2 years ago. Now I can sit down and completely read that textbook and it's not even that hard. So this is something that comes with time, right? The more you read the textbook, the more that you study, the better you're going to get at assimilating new information, okay? And so if you consistently kind of get addicted to mental exercise, get addicted to your routine, just study day in and day out and really enjoy doing it, then as long as you don't get burned out, long term you're going to be able to assimilate more and more information and grow at a faster pace, okay? So in order to achieve that, you need this balance between pushing yourself to your limits, but also knowing the point where it's literally dangerous and you're going to get mental injury if you keep doing this, right? And so that's going to look like taking the appropriate course load, prioritizing quality over quantity, creating a flexible schedule, which can account for scheduled rest and also just flexibility to do your hobbies and let your brain recover, but then also enforcing consistent work that pushes you to your limits, and consistent work that brings you weekly towards your long-term goals. All right, so these are my pieces of advice on avoiding burnout, and thanks for watching.